Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start the next session, which is all about unraveling géologie. Voila. So our moderator, Andrew Jefford from the UK, is journalist, speaker, educator and author of various books and columns, and he will lead this session. Thank you very much, Andrew. Our speaker, Gabriel Lepousez, that also don't need any introduction, neuroscientist at the Institut Pasteur here in France, and he will be talking on the neurosensory experience of géologie. And we will also be joined by Sean Matthijssen, who is standing in for Ken Forrester, who couldn't get on the flight from Dallas in time for today. But I think you look like a great, like a great Ken, even like a better than Ken. No. Lovely to have you, Sean. He's the winemaker of Ken Forrester wines, and so very well positioned to speak on this topic. Then Sam Schrock. Sam, there we are, Sam. Sam is from the US originally, but he is today a research engineer at the IFV Soil Service in France. And he will be also joined by Philippe Porcher, owner of Domaine de Rocheville in Saumur, and also the president of Van der Chenin, like we introduced earlier today. So, Andrew, without any ado, over to you. I leave you with my micro, and it will be the same formula, panel discussion, and at the same time tasting, but I leave you to handle how it is done.
Thank you so much. I'll just go over here for the first bit. Great to be with you all here. We're all huge fans of Chenin, I know, so wonderful to be joining you for this fantastic celebration. The introductions have been done very kindly, so that's great. And a particular thanks again to Sean for stepping in for Ken. That's wonderful. Wonderful to have you. Okay, so what's going to happen? So I'm going to make one or two quick remarks at the beginning of the presentation about the topic, and then we'll hand over to Gabriel, who's going to present his work on geosensory tasting and some of the neurosensory science that lies behind it. And then after that, we'll move to the tasting part, the practical part of the session. We'll taste 4 wines together, made in different zones along the river's course. And to set the scene, Sam Schrock was going to provide a short overview of the work he does at the Institute of Grapevines and Wines, the IFV, and in particular explain the concept of terroir units to us. And for each of the wines, he'll also provide a very short aperçu of their geological context. We'll then taste the wines together, and I'm going to ask some relevant questions of Philippe and Sean, and we'll get some geosensorial observations about the wines too from Gabriel. As before, for the first part of, as for Michelle's presentation, you'll have ample data up on the screen behind to look at for each wine. Not a tutored tasting. You're free to make your own notes. You're free to draw your own conclusions. You're free to taste at your own speed, though remember we only have 2 glasses, so we have to move through those with repouring and emptying as you did for the first session. And then we aim to have 5 minutes at the end for questions, so please do think of any questions you can come up with during the session, and we'll go through those at the end. Now, our subject, as you can see, is unraveling geology as we taste wines. In other words, we're going to approach one of the most seductive, sometimes hypnotic notions that cluster around the idea of terroir, and that is the idea of soil signatures. We'll be talking about rock types and soils, of course, but please remember as we go that terroir is much more than simply geology and soils. Yes, of course, the soil is a vital part of the picture. We've already had that discussed to some extent in the first session. But to concentrate on soil at the expense of other factors would really betray the science which is painstakingly illuminating terroir, which would be a shame. So do bear that in mind. What of soil signatures in wines? How should we respond? How should we understand the notion? How should we appreciate the notion? How should we use the notion? Well, I'll just give you my personal view. It won't take long, and then we'll see where we get to with the tasting as it unfolds. But I believe that the search for soil signatures is really most revealing within long-established fine wine zones where all of the growing factors, soil, topography, climate, and culture too, are clearly propitious. Ideally, those zones should contain a contrasting variety of soil types in relative proximity. And the search works especially well for white wines made from a single grape variety in what we used to think of as cool climate conditions. And that single grape variety should be capable of unusual levels of expressive articulacy. And the further you move away from those parameters, in a way the harder it gets to see soil signatures. Happily for us, Chenin Blanc, grown up and down the banks of the river Loire, and especially in Anjou-Touraine, is just such a variety, and in just such a zone. So with our mouths beginning to water, I'll hand over to Gabriel.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for being there. Thank you to ESA, thank you also to Etienne who managed to organize all this. So my point today is really to question this notion of geosensory tasting. Can we find in the wine some soil signatures, some soil attributes? And to start this discussion, let's start to debunk a bit the topic with some common urban myths about geosensory tasting. Like we're supposed to be able to find signatures in the wine because we have been able to taste some rocks, or maybe in geosensory tastings we assume that the vine reflects totally the signature of the soil, and these signatures are present in the wine. For example, those two statements are, from far what I know, is totally wrong. Why? Because they are a bit naive, they are a bit romantic, as you mentioned, Andrew. Because between the soil and the rock and our mouth, there is multiple layers of indirect transformation. For instance, I would say most of the roots of the vine are in contact with the rocks, but they're in contact with the soil. And so what we have to understand is not the geology of the place, but more the pedology. And that's why we have Sam Schrock here with us to help us to understand the transition between geology and pedology. We have to understand the plant physiology. We cannot assume that a vine is a simple sponge that collects the ions from the soil and transmit that to the grape. This is not how it works. A plant is selectively taking what it needs. If you have a vine growing on a salt marsh, for example, you won't have a salty wine. Because the plant is actively selecting the elements that it needs to grow in different conditions. So we need plant physiologists to understand what it goes. Then all this is transformed through the prism of bacteria, yeast, etc. And all the work of microbiology, enology will change dramatically the expression of the soil, the expression and the release of some compounds, whether they are volatile compounds, phenolic compounds. And at the end also we have to understand what happened in the mouth, what in the nose, what are the sensory detectors that are able to track some elements that are potentially directly or indirectly linked to the geology and the terroir. So I'll take two examples just to show you the complexity of this geosensory approach, and to show you that we know much more about what we don't know than what we know. So from the rock to my mouth, there is, I mentioned, soil, vine, wine, and mouth. And I'll take an example of a situation close to here. We have limestone rocks here in the region of Saumur. This is the rocks, this is the soil, and these rocks contain calcium that can be released in the soil, and the presence of calcium can be potentially an attribute that you can potentially detect in the mouth. Potentially, but no, because there is multiple factors that will change the ability and the availability of this calcium to be sensed by our detectors. First of all is dissolution. We have to have this dissolution of calcium. We have also to have this calcium bioaccessible, and here pH is important and it really influence a lot the solubility of calcium. In the cave, in the cellar, this calcium can drive massive tartaric precipitation. So here we have, in combination with tartaric acid, a limiting factor that limits the concentration of calcium in your wine, even though you've been growing on a chalky or limestone soil. And last but not least, in our mouth, we have some detectors for calcium. Calcium is a very important element for our body. Look at your tooth, your bones, for example. But we have also a lot of calcium in our saliva. So to detect the presence of calcium in our mouth, we have to go above the concentration of calcium that we have already in our mouth. And just to give you a hint of all these elements, here is the concentration of calcium, for example, in our saliva. It's an average concentration. Here's the detection concentration that of our detectors. And this is the maximum concentration that you can find in the wine because, again, of this limitation factor from the tartaric precipitation. This is not true for magnesium, for example. Magnesium, we have a lower detection threshold, and magnesium can concentrate much more in the wine because there is no precipitation with tartaric acid. Sodium, nice example. Sodium, which drives the saltiness of seawater. Sodium, even if your vine were growing on a salt marsh, sodium is not accumulated in our cells, whether we are a plant or a mammal. And the job of the plant is to repel the sodium out of the plant. And that's why you won't find a lot of sodium in the wine. So just to show you that the picture is complex because of the multiple intermediate level. I'll take another example, just to discuss then about the wine we're going to taste. Sandy soils, sandy and granite soils, are known to have, most of the time, a lot of nitrogen deficits. And I will let Sam comment on this nitrogen deficit, which is not specific to this soil, but could be also present in different soils. These nitrogen deficits that can happen and be visible at the level of the mast will end up with inducing a stress in the yeast fermentation. And the yeast, according to the presence of nitrogen or not, will change the trajectory in terms of fermentation. And people have shown, and when I say people, it's people from Switzerland, from also works from South Africa, have shown that under this stress of low nitrogen source, low yeast available nitrogen, you have increase of production of succinic acid, which is an organic acid that is slightly umami, so slightly salty, I put brackets here, but decrease of fruity esters, potentially increase of H2S, so a smell that we don't like. So just to show you that here's some signature of the soil can affect some elements that can end up in a form of salinity in the wine. And I'm pretty sure that the wine number 3 that we just tasted before, that was commented by Michel as saltiness, and salty was in fact more an umami signature. So again, the picture is complex because of this multiple intermediate level. And I invite you just on the nitrogen aspect to read this interesting review from Van Leuven lab showing all the different parameters that can influence this availability in nitrogen. So wine tasting is complex, and you all know about that because we are tasting an object that talks to our brain with color, with smells, with aroma, with textures, with taste. And so it's a complex picture because at the end we have to reconstruct a global idea from these multiple senses. And so it looks simple to taste, but from the brain it's very complex. And it's even more complex when you have to sort out in the wine which elements of the wine participate in the sensory attributes. When you taste a wine, potentially you have a hierarchy of factors that can influence the wine properties. Could be the grape variety, Chenin blanc versus Sauvignon blanc, for example. Could be the vintage, could be the winemaking. There will be a session specifically on the impact of winemaking and élevage on the wine. This can affect what you taste. Viticulture, and somehow, somewhere, terroir. But which of these parameters speak louder? That's always the important question to ask. When you taste a wine, try first to understand not whether or not you have a signature of granite or limestone, but just ask you the question, whether or not I'm in front of a wine in which this parameter speaks louder enough compared to these other ones. And it's not always the case. And if I dive into just the parameters that can influence wine sensory attributes, here I'm citing two wonderful reviews from Kees van Leuven from Bordeaux University, showing multiple parameters that are affiliated with the terroir that can influence some wine sensory attributes, among which you have soil texture, soil nitrogen, again for Sam, soil potassium and calcium, soil temperature, soil water, soil biological activity, geomorphology also, the orientation, etc. And then other parameters that we forgot sometimes, air temperature, solar radiation, rainfall, evapotranspiration. So a lot of parameters that can together work in the same direction or sometimes work in different direction. So that's make the story complex. And because these parameters can work at different layers, on olfaction, on taste, on touch, potentially on color, it's also important to sometimes to use words that are more holistic, because it's an holistic parameters that are influenced. When I say holistic, I take an example of an holistic word, minerality. Minerality can mean a lot of stuff. A wine can be mineral because of the presence of some aromas. A wine can be mineral because of the presence of salty sensation in the mouth that remind you of mineral salt and potentially mineral water. Maybe you feel minerality because of the mouthfeel, because of the acidity, because of the sharpness, of the angulous aspect that remind you of the angulus of a crystal. You see, when we use minerality, is a typical example of a word that is very global, that we all understand, but in which multiple aspects of our sensory modality can participate in. So when you use global words like soil signatures, try to pay attention to which modality of your brain have been tickled by this terroir signature. Is it more on the nose? Is it more on the taste? Is it more on the texture? And that's important. Each time you use the word mineral, try to qualify this minerality. Is it olfactory minerality? Is it gustatory minerality? Is it tactile minerality? Just to parenthesis, acid is a taste, right? But acid comes from a Latin root, acere, which gave in French the word acerbe, or in English acerbic, which means sharp, pointed, arch. So even in the etymology of acid, you have the notion of taste and touch. Coming back to Chenin. Chenin is the main character today of our discussions. For me, Chenin is very interesting because among the wide grape varieties, this is one of the grapes that shows the highest content in phenolic compounds. 10 times lower than the red wine, of course, but still, it's the one that shows high phenolic content and also a lot of plasticity. Here I'm citing two studies, here coming from Bordeaux. This is a study coming from China. China is another place where Chenin is planted a lot, and this is an experimental winery in which they compared a lot of different grapes, planted exactly the same way, with the same Chinese rigor, I would say, and they observe again that Chenin has the potentiality to provide much more tannins, much more polyphenolic content. And among those phenolic contents, they found more phenolic acids, but also catechin, but also flavanol. That is interesting because it brings to the wine some elements that participate a lot in the texture, in the tactile perception. And so for me, one attribute of Chenin is the ability to communicate with the phenolic compounds with our tactile sense. So the sense of touch is, I would say, one of the forgotten sense when we taste. We talk a lot about aromas, about taste, but we sometimes forgot to discuss about touch. And today, with the help of Andrew, let's try to change a bit the hierarchy of the senses that we use to describe the wine and try to put the tactile sense a bit more on the stage. And I'm sure Andrew will help me on that. Why it's important? Because in our the sense of touch is very important in the mouth. Look into your brain. There is one area in your brain which encodes all the tactile perception of your body. Each part of your body that has tactile receptors has a dedicated region in your brain that get activated upon activation. If you touch my nose, it will get activated here. If I touch here my toes, it will get activated here. What is interesting is that you see the size of your hand is much bigger than the size of your feet. Why? Because we have much more receptors on our hands than our feet. So this map represents the, if you want, representation of or the density of sensors that you have. And look at the density of sensors that we have in our mouth. If I accumulate the lip zone, the mouth zone, the tongue zone, and the pharynx zone, we can consider that between 20 to 25% of our tactile perception is concentrated in our mouth. Our best tactile organ is our mouth, with some tactile discrimination threshold that are really, really low, 5 micrometers, which is fantastically the highest threshold that we can find in our body. So we are equipped with a fantastic tool, and just to try to recap how to analyze texture from I would say from a pedagogic point of view, I would say there is 3 dimensions to look into the wine when we look at texture. The first one is surface texture. When you touch an object, my shirt, for example, it's smooth or rough. This is associated with the presence of tannin. When your tongue touch your palate, you have the granulometry of the tannins, of the phenolic compounds, that are generated because of this surface texture. To touch the surface, you need to touch your tongue, you need to touch your palate. A bit like when I touch a piece of fabric, I move my thumb between my thumb and index like that. I do the same with my tongue and my palate. I do the same gesture. Because in movement, I can appreciate the granulometry of the tannin. Second dimension is the structure, the consistency. With the phenolic compounds and all the compounds present in wine, you can appreciate the thickness, the weight, the fluidity, the viscosity. If you want a simple axis, whether the wine is supple versus rigid. I'm close to time. And geometry, last but not least, the geometry. How the wine take a position in your mouth. What is the conformation of the liquid in your mouth? It's a liquid, but the liquid will potentially stay in the center or spread horizontally in your mouth. All these parameters can be also read carefully by our system. Pay attention also to evolution in time of these mouthfeels. You can start with something very rough and end up with something very smooth. Look at also the salivation. Your saliva has a texture, and your salivary reaction to the wine participate in the texture. And if at the end of your mouth you have something smooth and velvety and mouth-coating, this is potentially more your saliva than the wine itself. And also, more importantly, is the harmony and the balance between the other sensory modality, taste, etc. So let's try to apply this to the different wines. But keep in mind, again, tasting is complex because we have a multitude of channels. The brain tries to reconstruct all these channels together, and trying to find in this multitude of information, the simple information from the terroir is a difficult task. And so we have to be humble, really humble, into this quest. But let's try. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. That's fascinating stuff, and we'll try and put it into practice when we do our tasting in a minute or two. We'll now move on to the applied bit of the session. So, Sam, if you could come up and present us with your work on the terroir background, and in particular the concept of terroir units. Fantastic.
Okay, hello. Can you hear me in the back? So let's see. All right, so I'm going to briefly talk about my work doing terroir mapping at the IFE, and then we'll get to some specific examples of different terroirs with the 4 wines that we'll be tasting. So essentially, what are we doing in the team mapping terroirs? We dig a lot of holes. So we use a manual auger. That's here on the photo on the left. We take about 15 centimeters of soil. We look at the color, the texture. Is it sandy, clay, silty? Is it rocky? And we'll note down everything that we find. And then we'll move and we'll do another observation. We do about 1 every hectare. And then we use that to create zones. So you can see the photo on the right. There's a number of points. Those are each observations. And then we'll delineate zones for each different soil type. And then after that, we'll come back with a backhoe and dig a soil pit and do a more in-depth observation, take soil samples for each horizon. So soil is organized in horizontal horizons. You can see you've got a darker top layer here. There's lots of organic matter in the surface layer. Then you may have different textures as you go down. Maybe silty, sandy, and then finishing with clay is a common order of soil horizons. And at the same time, we'll take samples and send them in for laboratory analysis to get an idea of the chemical composition of these soils as well, and the physical composition as well. And then we also are studying existing data. The geology map will also look at elevation data, and we'll calculate water flow analysis, so like the topographic wetness index, to see if some parts of the vineyard are getting more water than others naturally through water flow on the surface. Also orientation. If you've got a really hilly vineyard, is it south facing, north facing? South facing in the northern hemisphere, you're going to get a lot more sunlight. In South Africa, of course, it's the opposite. North facing will get a lot more sunlight. And then we will also speak to growers doing surveys to get an idea of how these soils affect the vines. Empirically over generations, growers have seen the same effect of their soils on their vines, the same influence on their wines, and so we like to get that information from the growers. Okay, so what are we mapping? We call these different zones terroir units, and a terroir unit has three components. So there's the geology. The geology. So you've got the different kinds of rocks. This is basically the raw materials that will weather, that will break down to develop your soil. So here we've got a few examples. We've got the limestone chalk up top. Then on the left there you've got shale from Anjou. And then this is a sandstone, and then you've got granite here at the bottom. And depending on the rock, the bedrock, you're going to have different mineral composition, different chemical composition. For example, this granite here has a lot of feldspar in it. Feldspar has a lot of potassium. That's important for wine because if you have a lot of potassium in your wine, you'll have acid precipitation, potassium bitartrate in the tank. The potassium will combine with tartaric acid. That will drop out of the wine, create crystals, and basically you're lowering your acidity of your wine. And then there's other, of course, many different technical adaptations that have to be done depending on your soil type. For example, for the limestone soil, very high calcium carbonate. Only certain rootstocks can grow in this soil. So if you're not careful and you plant a rootstock that's not adapted to calcium carbonate, it just won't grow. So then you've got your soil type. So this is basically how weathered is your soil. So this is three different soils that are developed on calcium carbonate chalk soil in the Loire Valley. So we've got on the middle there in the top, we've got a very superficial chalk soil. Then we've got one that's a little bit deeper, and then one that's completely weathered. So it's turned completely into a heavy clay. So calcium carbonate is extremely soluble, and so as it rains, it'll go into solution. It'll go off into streams, into the Loire, and then off into the ocean. And what stays behind is the harder elements. Silex. Flint, flint that will stay behind, and then of course all of the clay. So that's where you often see a lot of clay in limestone soils. And then the third component is the topography. So this is basically whether you're going to have more sun. Like I said, south facing in the northern hemisphere, you're going to have more sun. North facing, you're going to have less sun. But then also you have these various contours. You've got concave, convex ridge lines going down the slope, and that's going to greatly affect how water flows through your vineyard. And this is a very extreme example. This is in the Douro Valley in Portugal. So you can see on the right side, it's kind of like a north-facing, west-facing slope, and then you've got a south-facing slope on the left side of the photo, and the amount of sunlight is clearly very different. So with our work, the results, we put them all up on a website called terroir. And so on the left, I don't know, it's a little bit small, you may not be able to see that. But we'll put on the surface texture, the depth texture, how well water drains in the soil, and then we also calculate the soil water holding capacity to give you an idea of how much water the soil can hold if it rains enough to fill that reservoir. And then based on these findings, we also calculate a vigor potential that is given from the soil, vigor conferred by the soil, and the precocity, the earliness that is given from the soil. Of course, this is independent of rootstock choice, of clone choice, and of like weather conditions. This is just influence from the soil. And another use of this work. So this is an example of the mapping that we're doing most recently in Découvrez. This is kind of a sneak peek of these maps aren't released yet. This is a map of the lieu-dit Clos des Modérateur, and so one of the things that can be used for that this mapping can be used for is to create like a cru system, so like a kind of a sub-label within an appellation to really add value to a particular area. So the idea is that if you've got one soil type, so for example, in the south portion of this map here, you've got chalk soils for the most part, and then clay over chalk. And it's fairly uniform within this lieu-dit, in this place. And so you can create a single vineyard wine or a single soil wine, if you will. Or there may be other lieu-dits. For example, at the top, there's a lieu-dit l'oreille. There's 6 different soil types in that lieu-dit. Maybe the wine is excellent from there, and there's great reputation from that lieu-dit. But the excellence comes from the diversity of the soil types. So it's a tool. It's for the growers, and they can play with it and develop, the labels, how they, they'll see whether there's more quality or less quality, and yeah. So okay. So I think yes. So yeah, sure. So this is the 2023 vintage report. So monthly average temperatures, rainfall between April and September. So yeah, you can see. Let's see. Yeah, I haven't overviewed this one.
The key point to make, I think, is that it means that vintage isn't a confounding issue for any of the wines we're going to look at.
Okay.
Because they're all the same vintage.
Right. Yeah. 2023 across the board here.
Yeah, and it as you can see by the Montré Belay, I mean, whatever you see is departure from the 30-year norm. So you see that 2023 was clearly a very warm vintage with 2 heat spikes, one in June and one in September. And it was also a much, much wetter vintage than normal. You can see colossal rain in June, but also significant rain in May and August and September. So that gives you a background for the vintage, which is a vintage with actually colossal disease pressure, as you can see from that data. It contrasts with elsewhere in France, but that doesn't need to concern us. It's just some background for what we're going to taste.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to go into the tasting now. So we have 4 wines here for you. You have the first 2 poured. So going across the Loire Valley, the first wine is kind of further away from the other 2. So this is the Loire Volcanique. This is in La Côte Rouennaise area. So much more continental climate, much higher rainfall. 972 millimeters compared to about 710, 720 or so for the other three. Let's see, a little bit cooler average annual temperature, but of course more continental, so maybe much colder winters, maybe a little bit hotter summer, but on average cooler overall. And then the three, let's say, lower Loire Valley wines are fairly similar in rainfall and average temperature and sunshine. So this first wine that you'll be tasting, this is from Domaine Serrol, Côte Roannaise, 2023. And this is a wine planted on a granite colluvium. So basically the rock is uphill from the vineyard, and it has weathered, and the small pieces of granite have turned into sand, and they've rolled down the hill with erosion, and it's created this very deep soil, but very, very sandy. A lot of drainage, very easily drained soil, but also very, very deep. So very deep rooting. And then this is a granite. So I mentioned earlier, granite, a lot of feldspar, a lot of potassium, something that a hypothesis I would expect from this wine is that even with less ripeness, you'd get lower acidity. And I don't know if you've tasted it yet, but if you look at the lab analysis, we've got 3.1 grams per liter. This is in sulfuric acid measurements, so multiply by 1.5 if you want tartaric acid measurements. So fairly low alcohol, not a super ripe level, but it's also not super acidic. So very interesting, and I that may come from the geology, terroir effect. So yeah, single vineyard planted in 2018, Massel selection on grab sack and 101-14 rootstocks. So 400 elevation, much higher elevation than the other three wines that you'll be tasting. So water holding capacity about 130 millimeters. So kind of average, not low, not super high, and very high density, and certified biodynamic organic agriculture, hand harvested, pressed, and then aged in 500 liter barrels. Okay.
Just bring over the clicker and we'll do the rest over here. Lovely. Thanks, Sam. Okay. Great. Well, we'll talk about the actual flavours and taste, and talk a bit to Gabriel about that in just a minute. But in order to bring Philippe and Sean into the discussion, I had a chat with Philippe last night, and he said he definitely didn't want to talk about anybody else's soils and all the rest. He didn't want to get into that. He's very happy to talk about his own, which is in Saumur. So I thought I'd just ask you one or two general questions, Philippe. And perhaps we could begin with the one, just to talk a little bit about Chenin. Last night when we were talking, you said you felt it was very important that you could best see a soil signature when it was a single grape variety. You felt that that was the essence of, you were going to get the essence of the variety at that point, which is logical. And you also said that you felt that Chenin was exceptionally good for expressing nuances of soil. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that?
Yes, with pleasure, especially in English, okay? Oui, avec plaisir. In fact, I have, for me, in fact, in Saumur, we have the chance to have in Anjou, to have the black Anjou and the white Anjou. And we speak a long time with my friend Patrick Baudouin between the black Anjou and the white Anjou. And in fact, we are very rich to have the many different soils of the same area. And because even in Saumur, I have different parcels. Of course, it's absolutely different with the South Africa, because South Africa, I don't see everything in 2022. But I remember there is a big farm anyway. A small farm is something in 100 hectares. And in fact, a small farm in France is 15. And we have, for a long time, very small parcels. And we have many, many neighbors. So it's difficult to make, of course, with our administration. So what I saw from a long time, and Gabriel, it's, for example, it's between, I have a plot in Brezé and one in Parnay on the coast. And in fact, we in the field we work in the same way. We make the harvest almost at the same time, and we make the vinification also in the same way. And we have two different wines. We don't need to oppose it, but even if the vintage is different, for example, with the 2000 at this time 2023, we have in Brezé it's salivant. It's salted in salivant. Anyway, anytime. And in Saumur, it's different. The good food pair wine for me, I love food pair wine. The good food pair wine for me, it's in fact, I love scallops, for example. It's carpaccio of scallops in Brezé, with Brezé. And it's a scallop Normandy style, you know, with sauce, with la côte in Parnay. So, of course, what I am afraid also, it's there is a passion with the Chenin. We work a lot with Fan de Chenin in France. And La Côte is a good example because a long time ago there was only white wine, only Chenin on the coast and Saumur. And when the Saumur Champigny, for example, I am also a Champigny's winemaker, of course, but was up at this time in 1970. It was better for the value to put away the Chenin. It was crazy. Because the time is balanced, of course, history is balanced, but we need now. Chenin is the market need Chenin, need white wine, okay, and so we need to be careful to don't do the same things because some parcels are ability to make good wine to good Chenin, and some of them not.
Okay, so you're stressing very much that this is a region well set up to make these comparisons because the parcels are relatively small and because you're lucky enough to have these contrast in soils in close proximity. That's great, and we'll come back to Brezé, of course, with wine number 3. But I'd like just to go to Sean because Sean, we're talking about granite with this particular wine, the first wine, and of course granite is a very significant soil type in South Africa. Along with sandstone, it's really one of the fundamental soil types. So perhaps, and I believe at Ken Forrester, it's a soil type that you have quite a lot of, both sandstone and granite. So perhaps you'd like to talk a little bit about what granite means for you at Ken Forrester and how you work with it and what you see given to you by the soil.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a bit of granite in essay, or to bring it to that case. I've got a lot of notes here. But yeah, as granite weathers in these different forms, you get the two common ones. It does nothing to quartz, and that you'll see a lot in the Swartland area. And in the Stellenbosch area, when it weathers down to sand. So you have a lot of these sandy top layers, but very decomposed granite in Stellenbosch. So that will be expression of much more fruit, much more aromatics in terms of Chenin Blanc, where you go to the Swartland where the granite didn't weather. And that will be much more influence, impact of a lot of minerality contribution in terms of these wines. So it also enhances.
Can I just interrupt at that point? When you say minerality, you mean a lack of fruitiness in some ways. Is that right? I mean, I'm just asking.
If you look compared to the Swartland, it doesn't have cool. And I believe Chenin Blanc needs cool sunshine. And if you look at where we're sitting as Ken Forrester, we're about 6 kilometers away from the coast. So we get the coolness. But also because of the top layer, the sandy soil, it's also cooler soil, so the flavor development is quite, predominantly. That's why you get a lot of aromatics. Whereas with the Swartland, it get heat, a lot of heat, 45 degrees Celsius. So what does the vine do? it goes down deeper into the soil. And most of the Swartland vines are dryland vines, so they have to go down. The vine works harder. It takes up what it needs. It's not necessarily going to produce a lot of fruit profile, but much more in terms of pallet weight.
And the fruit you're using is presumably older vines in Swartland. So we go back to what Rosa was saying in the first presentation.
Yes, I use a lot of. I have 2 parcels in the Swartland. One is they about 50 kilometers apart from it. One in the one corner of the Swartland and one in the other corner of the Swartland. And the 2 age of these vines is 40. The one is 48 years old and the other one is 50 years old. So, and compared to, if you have to compare the decomposed granite compared to the granite in the Swartland, it's totally different. You on the Swartland, which I produce fruit, you get a lot of these mouthfeel, structured, great acidity. Whereas the Stellenbosch granite, decomposed granite, gives me a lot of fruit profile, driven complexity, etc. Yeah.
And one other question I'd just like to ask you at this stage, because it has a bearing on something we were talking a lot about in the first presentation, was the significance of structural acidity to Chenin, to the Chenin character. And I think that's something we probably all noticed in the first wines, and we're probably all going to notice in these wines too. But can I ask you, do you have to adjust acidity where you are, or can you use your natural acidity and it's adequate?
What I do, one of my magic things is my go-to things is, because I make a Cap Classique
sparkling
wine of Chenin Blanc. So what I do is, with most of my wines, I pick early, as you're picking as for a base wine, and then I'll use that. I bank the acid. First thing I do is I bank acid, and that allows me to now go for different ripeness levels, or according to, because you never know what the season brings you. It could give rain or etc., or you get a lot of heat strokes. But that's my ability to adjust my acid naturally.
Okay, that's what you do. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so let's talk about the taste a little bit now, and we'll bring perhaps Gabriel in, who's had a chance to have a look at the wine. Just run through what you're finding in relation to what you spoke about earlier, in particular in terms of sort of shape, for example, and we're talking about acidity, so that would be another interesting topic here.
So I think it's important. We have the chance today to have single grape variety, single vintage. So we have erased a few parameters that can overshadow our readings. So please try also to not taste one by one, but compare the wines. This is where you're going to find out which is the signature of which one. One important statement also is wine number 1 is young vines. And this is also a question for Sean. When you have a young vine, so they are almost very young, so they have not fully get in contact with the soil, with the granite, etc. So maybe the expression here is also limited, and this comes to the old vine project. With a young vine or with an old vine, you cannot expect the same in terms of expression, and you may find in wine number 1 compared to the other ones a bit of dilution. I call it dilution. It's not a negative word, but it's not as concentrated as it could be. If I compare to very old granite from other parts of the world, like South Africa. But what I like in this wine is, from the aromatic element, it's very discreet, very subtle, not that much aromatic elements, but in the mouth, very fluid, a lot of fluidity and a form of salinity, umami-like signature at the end, very subtle also. That is for me typical from sandy or granite soil. And I remember a metaphor from Jacques Puiset, an old enologist in France, saying in granite and sandy soil, most of the time they bring fluidity in the wine. Like if when you take some sand on the beach, the sand is sliding on between your fingers. You have the same sensation in your mouth. This is a metaphor. This is not a scientific demonstration. But I keep that as a memory. For me, these sandy soils bring much less phenolics than in that we have in Anjou Noir, for example. And you have this sensation of fluidity together with the saltiness. And listen to your salivation at the end also. How you salivate, how you react in response to the wine. This texture that appears in your mouth, you salivate maybe on the side or maybe in the front. I have more salivation on the front here on the first wine, which is a signature also of the presence of umami compounds. The presence of some compounds will affect the way you salivate. Acidity, lemon juice will activate salivation on your side here. Umami will provide a salivation that is much slow, progressive, much more mouth coating, more in the front. This is not black and white, my story here, but you may try to find a point of reading into your reaction to the wine, which is very important.
Just a quick question on actually the use of the term salinity. Bearing in mind that it's not sodium, is it really a good term? Should we actually be moving away from this term and finding a better, different term? And if so, what might that be?
You're totally right, Andrew. It's the difficulty is that if I start to say this wine is umami, I may have 90% of the room that don't understand, right? So from the communication point of view, I make a mistake. If I use salinity, in French we use salinity instead of saltiness. I use salinity because I know it's not salty, but I don't know how to call that because it looks like salty, but it's not salty. So we tend to use this saline word, which is, I agree with you, a bit misleading because we don't know what we are talking about, as a way to understand the difference and try to tease out the difference between sodium and umami. Sodium is really at the attack. If you feel saltiness in the attack, very, very sharp in the attack, this is the saltiness of seawater. If you see a slow, persistent and progressive saltiness at the end of your mouth, that is juxtaposed with reaction of salivation in your front, this is more umami-like. So in my personal description of the first wine, I would say this is umami-like. I don't know if there is umami compounds, but it looks like an umami-like beverage.
Yeah, language difficulties. The whole topic is beset with colossal language difficulties. And one other quick question. We're all familiar with the map of the tongue, where you taste different tastes in different parts of the tongue, and saltiness is meant to be tasted at a certain part of the tongue. So could we, and I forget which that is, whether it's the sides or the tip, I think it's one of the two. But could we therefore say that if you're tasting, you have this impression of what we're calling salinity in the center of the tongue, or at the back of the tongue, that is more likely to be, let's say, some kind of terroir factor than it would be pure sodium that you might get from heavily irrigated soils in Australia, for example?
So potentially, I just want to, again, debunk another myth. The taste map on our tongue is totally wrong. And so the idea that we have more bitter on the back, more sweet on the front, more acid on the side, this is a mistake from a bad interpretation of a supposition, an hypothesis that was proposed in the 50s. So when you taste acid, you feel something on the side, and I'm sure you agree with that. When you take lemon juice, you have something on the side, but what do you have on your side? You feel on the side not taste, but the tactile perception of acidity. When you have lemon juice in your mouth, you feel contraction on your side. You feel salivary reaction that provides salivation on your side because the salivary glands that react to acid release saliva here and the molar region. And what you feel on the side is the tactile expression of acidity, right? So when you taste something acid, you feel acidity all over the surface of your tongue, and it's impossible to know which part of the tongue feel acid. But acid is also tactile. And in white wine, the structure of the wine is brought by the acidity. That is a major structural element of wine. And that's why Chenin is carefully banking acids, because that's the structure of his wine. And this acid also talks to our tactile senses. And so when I say something is more on the side, I here mention the tactile expression of acid, right? And so that's why important when you have high acid or low acid, you may not feel the same position of the wine. The wine may spread all over your mouth when it is low acid, so high pH. But when you have low pH, so high acidity, you may have the impression that the wine is more on the center of your mouth, more centered, more vertical sometimes, because you have acid here on the side that protects your mouth from being exposed to acidity. So you see, it's really a geometry and a conformation that happens in your mouth by the dialogue between the wine and your reaction to the wine, which makes stuff even more complex to see.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, time's pressing, so we need to move on to Découvrez. So, Sam, if you'd like to take us through. I mean, and also thank you for your first slide, and thank you for running through the soil, the terroir units, because it shows us clearly how colossally complicated this is. Of course, we're just going to be talking about clay, limestone, schist a little bit later. These are all wild, massive generalizations. And of course, something work like that you do points out just how complex this really is.
Yeah. So let's jump to the next wine here. This is planted on clay limestone. This is a chalk stone, and chalk is calcium carbonate with lots of imperfections. Well, it's not pure calcium carbonate. It has lots of clay, lots of flint inside of it. It's like a chocolate chip cookie almost. So as the chalk weathers, it disappears. It goes into solution and is washed away, and it leaves this clay. And the particularity of this clay here in Vouvray, it's incredibly rich in clay. So this is over 60% clay in this this vineyard in this middle horizon here. So that's I don't know, not unheard of, but it's pretty exceptional. So clay, very high water holding capacity. The soil water holding capacity of this soil is estimated at almost 200 millimeters. So definitely the highest of the 4 wines that you'll be tasting. And clay has another relationship to water in that while it can hold a lot of water, it doesn't necessarily give that water very easily. It holds on to it sometimes more strongly than the plant can actually drink that water, can suck up that water. So there's almost always water available, but the vine has to work for that water. So it's kind of in constant deficit irrigation. It's really something extraordinary. So let's see, what else can we say about this this wine? So single vineyard, planted in 2005, 220 clone on Riparia. Riparia rootstock is one of the least vigorous rootstocks and the earlier ripening of all the available rootstocks in France. And this is not for nothing. This is a very they call it in French terre forte. It's like a strong terroir. If you're not careful, you can produce a lot of vigor with all of this water holding capacity. And so this is definitely adapted to this terroir with this rootstock. And let's see what else. Located at 90 meters. So this is on the slopes, the limestone slopes just above of the Loire. 6,666 vines per hectare, organic agriculture, hand harvested, alcoholic fermentation with indigenous yeast, and aged for 12 months. And what else can we say?
That's great.
I just wanted to address the question about young vine planted in different terroirs. So compared to the last soil, where you have a very deep soil that's very uniform, so you've got sand for maybe 2-3 meters, you're going to have a very gradual progression as the roots go down into that terroir. Here you've got about 45 centimeters of a sandy silt on the top layer, fairly low water holding capacity, and then as soon as the roots get into 50-60 centimeters, there's an explosion of availability of water. So you'll have a very different when the vine is 3-4 years old, you're going to have a quick change, whereas the last one, the change would be very gradual.
Thank you, Sam. Philippe, let's come to you just to talk a little bit about the differences. I know on your estate you have differences where some parcels are very pure limestone, other parcels have a higher percentage of clay in. So just talk about the effects that gives you and how you react to that as a grower.
In fact, I think about one parcel, special parcels. I speak to you yesterday. In fact, in the same parcels, we have a nice exposition on the north, and at the top of the parcels, we make one wine, one cuvée, nice cuvée, la Dame, and at the end of the parcels, dans le bas, the bottom, yes, sorry. In fact, of course, we understood a bit before, the water go down, so it is more fresh. And of course, there is absolutely a difference between the grapes, between the beginning of the harvest and the end of the harvest. So we have we are in this parcel, we are in Riparia also, and we have small grapes also. It's important because with other clone it's different grapes, okay? And we have a nice and yellow when the weather is good, of course, on the top, and more green on the bottom. So we make another wine with the bottom.
So less advanced ripening, or is it not as simple as that? So the maturation comes more slowly, is that right?
The maturation comes slowly, and if the weather is no good, we need to be careful on the bottom, because the disease come very quickly.
Okay. So negatives as well as positives as far as clay is concerned. Yeah. So Sean, just tell us a little bit about clay in the context for you. What it means, what it does, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, what it gives you in terms of wine flavour, if possible.
So yeah, if you look at when on a topograph, for instance, you are in South Africa we call it a copy, a hill or mountain, etc., slope, where when it rains, the granite, all of the clay content washes down. It's almost because clay can be moved easily around. It's almost like you're in a mud puddle at the bottom. So what we find is that we have these clay parcels around, and because in South Africa's climate, soil soils have have a high clay content, and it has a good water holding capacity. And if you look at in terms of South African climate, these are very important for us. And wines produced from these clay soils, for me, in these parcels that we use, just to get clarity, Kent Forest is about 32 hectares of vines, but we allowed in South Africa to source from other sites. And what we do very importantly is when we find these special sites or special pockets, and there's a demand for that, we'll go and source that fruit from that producer. So it allows us to have these different styles and etc. So wines produced from these clay-rich soils for me, gives me a lot of impressive structure and longevity in that case. Yeah. And in the summer, the vines dries out. So what happens? The vine will work harder. So that's why you have these impressive structures in terms of, like Rosa said early on, when you feed the vine or you give him too much water, it becomes lazy. So when these vines dry out, the soil dries out, these vines work harder, and it gives that impressive structure for us, yeah, in terms of the context.
So generally something that you're looking for, that you like to find.
Yeah, it's always a good dimension always to have, or a single wine on its own, specifically because of it gives that impressive structure, yeah.
Just a quick question on irrigation, because I was chatting to you just before, and you say you have some irrigation. You try not to use it during the growing season if you can, mostly out of the growing season if possible. But in terms of if you're irrigating onto a clay soil as opposed to a very dry, stony granite soil, I assume you have to take a completely different approach.
Yeah, that's why we have probes in the soil. We make use of probes so that you don't irrigate unnecessarily. So we'll constantly have about 3 or 4 probes, depends on the size of the vineyard. And then we'll look at that. Our viticulturists he will look at it, and then we'll irrigate according to that. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have to irrigate less on the clay parcels in general?
You have to. Obviously, the water will be. The clay soils has a poor drainage, so you don't want to irrigate on a soil that has poor drainage in that case. Yeah.
Gabriel, perhaps we can now talk about the taste of the wine and clay in general in that context. I mean, people often think about clay as giving very fruity wines, quite generous wines, sometimes clumsy wines. that's the drawback of it. And of course, with Vouvray, we might also consider that perhaps it's easier to develop botrytis in zones with clay soils. But anyway, give us your take on the taste.
Yeah, to be very short, definitely you see that the aromatic have rise up a lot. The fruitiness is, and the ripeness of the fruit also have changed. I will also attract your attention on the mouthfeels. This roundness, here I'm talking about the roundness of the mouthfeel sensation, the almost elastic a little bit sensation. This is for me typically what is brought by clay. What is interesting is that pH is quite similar from the previous one. Total acidity is the same, or more or less, a bit higher this one. So what is important is to keep in mind that total acidity sometimes it can be a bit misleading. What is important is the quality, not the quantity of acids. When I say quality, is the nature of the acids. Tartaric versus malic versus this. And how the winemakers also play with that. Do you do your malolactic fermentation or not? Which can adjust the roundness, emphasize the roundness of clay, for example. Which is, for me, difficult at some point to find out. Is it the buttery of the malolactic fermentation or is it the roundness of the clay? Sometimes it's difficult. We just raised an important point with Sean right now is the stress imposed by the soil can change the size of the grape, the size of the berries. We know that Chenin is a thick grape, a thick skin grape, sorry, and the ratio between the pulp and the skin can change according to the stress. If you are on a schist, if you are on clay, etc., and this will change probably the pressing procedure. So will change also the way you interact with the berries. Can you comment on that? How you also adapt your pressing to the quality of the soil? Is it something you keep in mind also?
Yes, definitely. If you look at some of the shale soils in the Western Cape, in the Swartland, Malmesbury, when I look at the fruit Chenin Blanc from that parcel, it has very small berries because the vines is worked harder, like you say. And then if you look at Stellenbosch, it's a bit of a bigger berry. So you definitely have to adapt because you don't want to press too hard. You will get a lot of phenolics. So you have to adapt your winemaking your choices in that case. So it because of the stress that you put on there, but these are good stress in that case. So your berries will be smaller, much more concentrated, and that's why these clay soils, like I mentioned, gives you this excessive structure and longevity because of the way you stressed it and the smaller the berries are.
Okay, Philippe has something to say. I'll just quickly, before we go to that, because you spoke about texture and the different levels and layers of texture earlier when you were doing your presentation, and I always feel with wines from clay soils, texture is quite important. For me, on this wine, for example, I'm getting that second layer of texture, the solidity, the mass, much more than the first layer of texture. Is that right? Is that correct? I mean,
I'm not here to say what is good, what is bad, but I agree with you. And maybe a poll here in the room would be the final judge. Yeah, but your idea, yeah. When you have clay soils, you have much more elasticity, and also this idea of something more horizontal that spread along your mouth. Something like if the wine were spreading and joining all the part of your mouth, like a cream. You mentioned the idea of the scallop with the cream. We have the same idea. It's something that is spreading, very horizontal. And for me, this is typically what we have to keep in mind from the clay. When you mention fruit pairing, for me, that's a beautiful metaphor to describe the wine. Without saying any description of the wine, just by seeing what is the fruit pairing that match, you're already talking indirectly about texture. Because in your mind, potentially, you're trying to match the texture of the wine, not the aromatic elements. And so that's, I think, when we go into food pairing, we communicate much easily with the public, with the audience, than when we start to describe stuff a bit technically with, this is rigid, this is supple, this is grainy, etc. So I think it's important to go on those two different levels of analysis, more holistic, like you say, but not very precise, but very communicative. And sometimes also we need precisions, we need the rigor of the description, but matching the two I think is important.
Yeah, I never thought about that before. Food pairing as a way of talking about a wine. That's interesting. Philippe, you wanted to say something?
Just to give an example for what you say, Sean. In fact, and I saw South Africa works also with Boucher. It's a company. It's a nice
Press.
company from here, from Anjou. Okay, for the pressoir. And I saw many pressoirs from Bucher in South Africa. And I use Bucher pressoir and pneumatic pressoir and with organ. And in fact, it's just an example, it's with the same parcels during the same process by the harvest by hand. In fact, when we use the organ, the system to the machine control the volume, okay? We with the different vintage, we have a very low process, 3 hours and a half, but sometimes we have some variation of 40 minutes with the same parcels.
Pressing time.
In pressing time with the same parcels, with the same quantity, with a different vintage.
Fascinating. Okay, Sam, take us on to Saumur now.
Okay, the next wine is also on a similar geology bedrock. This is also a clay, a limestone subsoil, another chalk. Although the clay layer is much more thin, not quite as thick, and it's covered by a sand, almost like a sand dune. So this area around 65 million years ago was just kind of like a giant beach, several sand dunes, similar to near Bordeaux, the giant the dune de Pita. So this sand is very susceptible to erosion, and it covers most of the vineyards in this area in Saumur, Chenin, Bourgueil. And so the top 50 centimeters or so are just this very, very, very sandy quartz soil. And then, so this would be, if you have a young vine in here, it would struggle the first year or so. And then as soon as it gets its roots into the clay and the limestone, it would be happy as a clam. So located at 70 meters above sea level, above the Loire. This is South Loire now, on the other side of the river from Vouvray and downstream a bit. Soil water holding capacity at 121. So this is a vineyard that we've mapped, and this is online on eTerroir. And so organic agriculture, natural cover crop, hand harvested. And something that I didn't mention with the last wine, just looking at the RS, the residual sugar, for the first two wines were at 0.6, 3.4, and 0.5. So the previous wine was the only wine to have a little bit of residual sugar. I don't know if anyone noticed that. Anyway, this is the Saumur.
Okay, thank you. We're running short of time. We've just got 5 minutes to go. Actually, less now, I appreciate. We'll have to be quick. I'm going to come straight to Gabriel at this point, because in essence what it seems like is that we had the limestone with the clay with the previous wine. Now we've got limestone with a sand admixture. Are you picking up that? How would you describe it? Would you feel that would be significant?
I hope that you all find a nice difference between the two. For me, this sand brings also more rigidity now. The wine is very firm, something very dense in a sense, compared to the other one that was more also fluid and viscous. So this also in my mind, I have the impression that something more cold here. People may say more fresh. Freshness is an interesting word because it can be fresh because it's cold, or bring you the notion of coldness. Also, it's fresh because it's rehydrating, salivating, right? So again, like minerality, freshness is a word that has two meanings: coldness versus rehydrating, salivating, quenching your thirst, basically. So this one is for me this notion of freshness, something cold, and I don't know if it is only the soil, but also maybe the geomorphology also of the terroir, the wind, stuff like that. But I feel this coldness here, and a bit of lightning, brightening. I don't know how to to express that in sensory words. This affect of bright something. I don't know where does it come from, but I have this impression in mind.
Yes, and I think it's very interesting also to compare the acidity in the previous wine, the Vouvray, with the acidity in this wine. Two very different acidities, very different shapes, very different volumes. Acidity we've talked about as being, in a way, the backbone or the nerve of a great Chenin always. And the contrast here is striking, particularly given how close the wines actually are produced from each other. We can't go through Saumur without giving a word to the Saumurois. So, Philippe, just talk us a little bit about your soil, your tuffeau, and particularly this element of there being some sand in it, because we had a little discussion about that last night, and you rather pushed away on that. So tell us about that.
Yes, we have of course, you know, in fact, in Saumur, you are on the plateau of the coast, and when you see on the north the river, la Loire, in fact, there is no appellation on the north. All the appellations are on the south, from the coast, from Parnay to the Berry to the Vienne, you know, there is 3 departments. It was complicated in France, you know, with the administration. So, and of course, we have with the erosion, with the time, a long time ago, very long time ago, there was a sea everywhere, and the shells of the billions of the little things made the famous tuffeau, the wonderful tuffeau, where the stone was they made all the castles of the Loire Valley, okay, and the houses also. And we have, and sometimes with the wind, there is not a mountain, a big hill, 90 meters, with sand at the top or at the bottom. That depends. And of course, we have also some influence with the wine, because normally what you say, Gabriel, in fact, with the sand there is more freshness. It's a more easy wine. We say in Saumur, in fact, it's a vin de printemps, spring wine. Okay. With, of course, we work at this time with DGC, Dénomination Géographique Complémentaire. Sorry for that. But in fact, it's to say, if the table is Saumur Blanc, it's always Saumur Blanc. I have one cuvée will be always Saumur Blanc because it's more fresh. It's a young. I put in the bottle. In fact, I make the bottling in Apple, for example, and it's a young wine, and maybe it's with the sand, more sand, okay, and or in the bottom, you know, and yes, of the hill, and in fact, the other one. We try to make some DGC to explain to the people to make also for the market some value with that, and to explain with some we oblige to make the harvest by hand and something else, and if INAO give us the permission at the end, we can promote also. And to explain to the people that there is a good value because it's not the same way, and it's a wine to aging wine. You understand?
In a way, to respect the complexities of the terroir as we find it. Now, very briefly, we got to go on to Anjou Noir, the different area of Anjou. So, Sam, open that up for us.
Okay, the fourth wine is planted on schist. It's the first. Wine of the day on schist. So this is a very shallow soil, very hard rock, a fractured rock. So you can see in the photo, the roots do go down into the rock, but they are like flattened, going through these cracks to find water where there is very little water. So yeah, a very shallow soil. Water holding capacity estimated at 36 millimeters. That's nothing. That's a very dry soil. Water stress is a serious problem on this type of terroir. Yeah, so I'm just going to keep it brief for the terroir on this one. Okay,
fantastic. So Gabriel, your thoughts on that? We've gone somewhere completely different, and it does taste different.
Yeah, and here comes I would say more phenolics and also slight bitterness, just to be short, etc. Also the rigidity, but the solar aspect also of this wine. There is a lot of sun, a lot of energy in this wine. It's kind of amazing how this we don't have the 4 seasons here in the glass we have here, but why not? Why not having the idea of having the 4 seasons? I'd like you to just play the game of, if you had to put 1 season per glass, which glass would you put on this last one, on the Découvrez, on the 2 other ones? I think it's just a nice idea to show how the cell signature can impact different aspects of the nose, of the touch, of the smell, in taste, the acidity, but the bitterness, we talk about that. So I think it's also interesting. Seasonality, it's important for the market. I like food pairing because we drink wine with food. So let's think about that, how to communicate with the wine from a different aspect. And potentially, that's one way to dive into the terroir.
Okay, well, I can see Naritha ready to spring onto the stage. So I'll say a big thank you to our panelists for their contribution and their insights. I've learnt a lot during the tasting. I hope you all have as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the second session. Just for we're going to have lunch now. So if you would take all your things, your bags, everything, because no one is coming back to this space. Please take everything that you have, and then we will move into the jardin, which is just follow Sophie. And then we're going to have lunch outside in the jardin, and then the bus will leave from the jardin to the Abbey. And that's where we will have Interloire that will do observatoire findings that they will share with us, and we'll do some more tasting. Thank you very much. Well, pardon. So the bus leaves at 2 o'clock. Make sure you are on the bus. Merci beaucoup.